Welcome back. You're watching View from the Top. My guest tonight is South Africa's Public Protector, Advocate Thulisile Madonsela. Before the break, Advocate, we were talking about how you deal with the issue of political pressure, and you were talking about process. But at a personal level, I mean, it would be naive to suggest that you're not coming under pressure from politicians. We've seen your predecessors, in some instances, cave to public pressure. A lot of people will argue that you're the first public protector since the institution of the office that has actually engaged robustly with the political elite in South Africa. How do you deal with political pressure? But more importantly, are there legal safeguards to protect your office from political pressure?
Yes, certainly. Firstly, I haven't experienced direct political pressure of the nature where there is a suggestion that a case should go in a particular way. The only thing I've had to deal with in recent months is the attempt to impugn the integrity of the office by suggesting that we are politically biased. But those were ridiculous suggestions, and we've dealt with them as such. Regarding just generally how do I deal with these things, I really deal with them by saying my approach is just to do what I'm hired to do. And when people question that, I explain to them in terms of the law, I explain to them in terms of the facts, and I invite them if they have a law that I omitted to look at or a set of facts that I omitted to bring those to my attention, and then if there's a need to review my thinking, I would do so. Mm-hmm. So it's always say, if you are suggesting something else, please provide evidence. So far, nobody has provided evidence. You recall that the Minister of Education said that I jump when the DA says I jump, and when the ANC asks me, I don't act. He first made that in public. I responded in public to say, evidence please, and I got none. And then he said it again. This time I wrote him a letter. I am yet to receive the evidence. Mm-hmm. So I've engaged by really, but I also use soft power, where I engage, I have stakeholder dialogues once a year, where we sit with people around the table and talk to them about what really are their concerns and what are their misgivings about the process explained. Because sometimes people just jump into the bandwagon, oh, you're not giving people opportunities. They haven't had an opportunity to look at the report and see, is it really true that the people who are crying wolf mm-hmm. were actually subjected to that kind of wolf treatment? Mm-hmm. So I think dialogue helps to get people to understand where I come from.
In terms of the scale of corruption in South Africa, I mean, we have many figures that are bandied about. In your experience as the public protector, where would you say corruption is at its worst? Is it at national level? Is it at provincial level? Is it in municipalities? Is it in corporate institutions? You know, where is corruption the most systemic, if you like?
That's a very difficult question because we haven't yet done a scientific assessment. It's part of our good governance initiative where we're coming together as institutions in the integrity sector. That's one of the things we want to look at. Things like, is corruption growing to start with, and where is it most endemic, at national or provincial? I must just indicate, based on anecdotal evidence, the corruption and lax controls go together, because often corruption is something planned, but like any other crime, sometimes it's an opportunity crime. So without any scientific data, it would appear that local government is most vulnerable because that's where controls are primarily loose.
Mm-hmm. What interests me, Advocate Madonsela, is that behind every corrupt politician lurks a business person ready to pay a bribe. To what extent is the Public Protector's Office focused not just on the public sector, as it should, but also on the private sector? And are we spending enough time and resources to actually look at the way in which the private sector aids and abets corruption?
No, certainly. With us, we guided by the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, which looks at corruption as a bilateral crime, really, is that when there's gratification, there has to be the one giving the gratification and the one accepting the gratification. And definitely when we do an investigation, we don't only focus on the actors within the state, we also look at actors outside the state. If it's a bribe, for example, who gave a bribe, or if they don't give, modern corruption doesn't involve people giving bribes though. The gratification might be more sophisticated. It might be shares that are going to a relative of the person who's granting the contract. It really is sophisticated. So, but we are looking at all parties that are involved. If you look again at on the point of tenders, we didn't just focus on state actors. We also looked at the actors outside the state who were involved in state affairs. But we don't deal with corruption that is entirely in the private sector. So, if all of the action took place in the private sector and no state action was involved, that is outside my jurisdiction as a public protector. But at the level of dialogue around ethical governance, around good governance, we're engaging with all actors in society, those in government and those outside government, to say we get a country we deserve. So all of us have to join hands to end corruption, whether it's in government or in the private sector, because if you allow it in one sector, it then obviously grows and grows and then affects all levels of society.
Advocate Madonsela, what I wanted to focus on is the powers that you have. I mean, in some instances you have quite wide-ranging powers, but in others you're not a court of law, for example.
Absolutely.
How do you give people the right to represent themselves? How do you give them the right to have a fair hearing? We have some individuals, for example, that have argued publicly that you didn't give them a fair hearing. You have come out, and in the case of Mr. Malema, for example, you've said that it's simply not true. But how exactly do you allow the parties that you're investigating to impact on providing their side of the story, as it were?
Thank you for that question. Although we're not a court of law, people have rights, and if there's a possibility of adverse findings against you, it's important that there is a fair process, and the Act gives me discretion regarding what that fair process is going to be. But there is a specific section 7.9 that says if in the course of an investigation, I believe I reach a point where I think I might make adverse findings against you, I must notify you. But then the Act says I will determine how I do that. In most instances, we called you to an interview and alert you what the allegations against you are. If they are directly against, I've never made findings against anyone direct against you as a person without having interviewed you. Secondly, we then have a provisional report which goes with a section 7.9 letter that says the only reason you're getting this report is there's a potential for adverse findings against you. And therefore, please look at it, and if we got it wrong, you advise us so. And many people, genuine people, have taken that opportunity. I just issued costly letters. Some of the people that were going to be affected by my adverse findings, after receiving the report, they got the lawyer to study the report, requested a meeting when we did that. And then on the point of tenders, we didn't interview Mr. Malema, that's true, because we requested the directors of On Point, and it was up to On Point to decide who the delegation was, and we met with them, and we never made direct findings against Mr. Malema. We made findings against On Point, and where did the money go to On Point? His concern was the fact that we said the money went to the trust and to the two houses in Sandton and to the farm. But that is information based on bank statements supplied by On Point. So if we were going to call Mr. Malema, it would have been to call him to try and confirm whether or not those were his bank statements. But those bank statements were supplied by On Point. We hadn't found them through our own sources. So there was no... When we call you either because we need evidence, new evidence from you, or we're giving you an opportunity to dispute evidence we have. But after the provisional report, Mr. Malema wrote to me through his lawyers indicating that he wasn't happy with the fact that there were adverse findings that have implications for him insofar as we said money was received by his trust, and that was money that was wrongfully taken from the state. And he then said that, and then I responded to him immediately and said, because we were not making direct findings against you, we didn't consider it necessary to specifically ask you to a meeting, but kindly advise if you would like to be interviewed, I would be happy to interview. Wrote back and said, no, they don't need an interview. So what I couldn't quite understand what was I supposed to do beyond that.
As a final question, Advocate Madonsela, because we're running out of time, in your assessment, how healthy is South Africa's constitutional democracy, given the substantial challenges we have, not just in terms of corruption, but also administrative access to justice for the majority of South Africa's poor?
I think we have a democracy that is built to last. Our constitution is one of the best in the world. It has very good anchors. It's a question of like any very good architectural plan, the implementation process must be constantly reviewed and make sure that you get it back on track. Like those RDP houses, I'm sure they had very good plans, but they ended up being shoddy. So it's our job to make sure that where we see problems, and we've just turned 18, I suppose like a teenager who's turned 18, it's crossroads, it's temperamental like any teenager, and I think if we stick to the plan in the Constitution, we stick to the character of the state in the Constitution, the vision of society in the Constitution, the public accountability provisions in the Constitution, we can turn the boat in the right direction.
Well, we have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Advocate Madonsela, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, our special guest tonight on A View from the Top was South Africa's Public Protector, Advocate Thulisile Madonsela. From me, Karima Brown, it's goodbye.